social aspects of every project. That is the hidden factor, the hidden risk that determine whether a project moves forward or whether a project collapses. This is why Rich Flood is doing this. Number one, targeted at our clients, and then number two, targeted at anyone promoting any form of project that could be financed by a financial institution or development financial institutions. So the slide is not showing, but I'll proceed all the way. The next slide was supposed to show environmental and social risks. What are they? These are risks that affect the environment. And not just the environment. These are risks that also affect the communities where the project is going to situate. In other words, we call it the host communities. And in the overall, it affects the sustainability of the project. And these include the environmental impacts like pollution in all its forms, and also social impacts, like when you have community conflicts or labor issues within a community, within the organization. These are social impacts. When a community rises to say, no, we do not agree with this project, we tag this as social impact. Or they have a form of grievance against the project. This is social impact, and it has really adverse effects on the project in the overall and the sustainability of the funding itself. And this type of impact also translates to operational, not just environmental. It relates directly to operational. It impacts operational activities, and it also translates to regulatory impact. Your reputation as an organization is also at risk, and also eventually financial risk and even economic risk. So E&S, which is environmental and social risk, is a particular aspect of a project that determine whether a project is funded or the funding is sustained or not. So when we talk about the E&X risks, we're really talking about risks that can affect the entire viability of the project. Next slide is why E&S risks is a hidden deal breaker or a deal maker. So E&S risks are often not visible at the early stages of the project. That is why we conduct ESIAs, that's environmental and social impact assessment. But however, during due diligences, during the ESIA, during other ESDD, which we call environmental and social due diligences, or during the assessment by the banks who are funding the project, these risks become very clear. The lenders immediately flag these risks because they can lead to delay for project implementation. They can lead to shutdown of the project, and most often they can lead to even losses. So this is why many deals fail quietly because of unmanaged environmental and social risk. And there are different types. The types of environmental risks we have, like I mentioned earlier, could be pollution of water. Most of our Nigerian people, if you remember the Ogoni land, where there is pollution of water, pollution of farmland, pollution of land, generally, these are environmental risks. This can halt a project, this can escalate social crisis, and can lead to operational risks as well, and financial risks. So it goes on and on once we miss the environmental risk assessment and mitigation. They also include inefficient use of resources such as water and energy. It can also be climate related. It can be transboundary, not just within the locality where the project is. And those projects, like in the Ogoniland case scenario that I mentioned, it can impact on biodiversity. So if these risks are not properly managed, they can lead to regulatory penalties. That is very common. But the worst that should not happen is that it leads to operational disruptions and close down of the project. We do not want that happening, and that is why we assess this early and take the proper action that needs to be taken. Next is types of social risks. Remember, we are dealing with both environmental and social risks, and they relate to people. As I said earlier, to communities. the host communities, the surrounding. They include conflicts. It could be land disputes. Maybe the project had acquired 1,000 hectares of land or 500 hectares of land. If the social risks associated with that land take is not properly managed, it could lead to land disputes. It could lead to displacement issues. Maybe the occupiers of the land, is their farmland, is their livelihood, source of livelihood. It could lead to that displacement. And other risks within the organization could also be labor conditions, and it could be health and safety concerns. So even when a project is technically sound, social risks can stop it from operating effectively. This is why we do these assessments. And where does the risk hide? E&S risks are often hidden in a weak documentation. There is a documentation, but it is weak, or the assessment is poor, and maybe the framework that was set up lack monitoring procedures. They can also be hidden in contractor activities, not directly by the project proponent, but the contractors who are brought into the project could be the ones that could trigger the E&X risks that are hidden. So this is where they're hidden, and we have to, in most assessments, in most due diligences, find all the loopholes where these risks could be hidden and try to make sure that we identify, we analyze, and we mitigate such risk. It could also be operational practices. It can be hidden in operational practices that are not properly controlled. This is why proper review and validation are really very critical for a project to succeed when it comes to the E&X risk assessment. So how does lenders view risk? They usually, from my experience, classify risks based on high risk projects. Those ones are usually rejected. The medium risk projects, those ones are given conditions before the project will proceed. And then the low risk project, they move faster. This is why E&S is directly linked to financial decision. It's not an afterthought. So what are the consequences when we ignore the risk? The consequences will include project delays. It can include regulatory shutdowns. I've sat in meetings where we're trying to negotiate with the regulators for the operation to proceed because of a shutdown. It can lead to community protest as well, and eventually rejection of financing. These are real outcomes that affect project success, and that is why we run this series, so that we can tackle them as part of raising awareness to project proponents or financial institutions, what to look at and how to manage the issues. Then I will talk about the risk and bankability. How does risk and bankability go together? A project without proper risk management is actually not bankable. If we have not identified the risks associated with a project and how to manage the risk, that project completely is not bankable. If the project has weak systems in place, that can result in conditional approvals. But when there is a strong system, a strong structure, like we discussed in the last episode, and also in future episodes, we've got a whole lot of arrangements in place to discuss the systems and the structures that need to be put in place for a project to succeed. So when the systems are strong, they make a project more attractive to lenders. They become more bankable. And bankability is directly tied to how risks are managed, not the lack of existence of risk. No, it is basically how the risks are identified and how they are managed. Talking about identification, how do we identify the risk? It can be identified through proper assessments, like I have talked about, and after the assessment, to proper inspections to make sure what is in the assessment matches what is on ground. And then continuous stakeholders engagement when it comes to social risks, most especially. And then monitoring, scientific monitoring of every aspect of the environment that needs to be monitored. And when we identify the risks early It is key to preventing major issues from happening later in the life cycle of the project. Now, how do we manage the risk? The risk can be managed through a structure, a system, as I said, through action plans, through monitoring frameworks, depending on what risks have been identified, and also through continuous reporting and updating regarding the risks that have been identified, what actions have been taken, or what future actions will be taken to ameliorate the risks completely. It is not a one-day activity, but an ongoing process throughout the life cycle of the project. We make common mistakes sometimes when handling risks or when tackling E&S risk. The common mistakes could include treating E&S as a paperwork. This is just a paperwork. We have a lot of clients who think so. And when you try to not make them look at it in that way, they say, no, but just tick the checkbox. We have done the right thing. No. E&S, ESA, ESG, ESDD, all of the frameworks and instruments available to a project is not just a paperwork. It is a tool to be used to mitigate risk. And a system must be set up around these tools to make sure that they are effective. And also, the common mistake we make is that we engage too late. Rich Flood, come and help us target this, come and help us develop an ENS, ESIA, that's Environmental and Social Impact Assessment. And when we get there, the project is halfway gone. That is a common mistake. Such projects are so hard to fund. We have to work hard to be able to establish some certain baseline environmental parameters of that environment before we can proceed. Another common mistake is lacking monitoring data. Yes, monitoring is taking place, but it's not properly documented because there is no structure to document or systems or people, responsible people set up to do the right things at the right time. Or there is even no monitoring at all until something happens, something bad happens, and then we start running around. Another common mistake is ignoring the community. Oh, this project is funded by so bank. This project is the national project. This project has the president of 2-3 countries interested in the project. The communities don't matter. When we ignore the communities in that direction, it leads to a lot of problems. Risks arise, risks that are not documented. And when they are not managed, it begins to become a red flag for the project and can halt funding. So these mistakes significantly increase the project risk, and we are trying to support the process at Rich Flood to make sure that clients identify the risks early, that our proponents, the project proponents, conduct due diligences early, that we join you, we work with you to develop systems and structures that need to be put in place, and then we establish monitoring frameworks to make sure that the project meets lender requirements and remains sustainable as necessary. What's the next step as I wrap up to listen to us? If you have questions, you can drop in the chat box and then we can attend to it, or we can see if we have the opportunity to also unmute people to speak. The next step is for you to look at your project and ask yourself, what risks exist in this project? And are those risks documented? Are they managed? Have you identified the risk? Do you have a risk register? Do you have frameworks or instruments that helps you manage this risk? If the answer is no, then it is important to take action early. And now is the time, irrespective of the stage of the project, to take action to avoid future challenges. We are available to support this process and to support your project readiness for funding. Thank you for your time. We are happy to now take questions.